Next, we have Ashley Goldon from Nation Outside. Ashley is the Executive Director of Nation Outside. Thank you for coming today.
Madam Vice Chairwoman, Senator Outman, Senator Irwin, I want to begin by offering each of you a prolific thank you, not just for your time today, but for your efforts to end once and for all what my semi refers to as the frayed rope ladder that is our current Michigan reentry infrastructure. Nation Outside and our partners are here with the solution we believe that will move us all forward together. Because our population faces more than 44,000 additional barriers that impact every facet of our lives, our advocacy and innovation at Nation Outside must go far and beyond that of just the criminal legal system to address issues of disenfranchisement, housing barriers, neighborhood disadvantage, employment and educational restrictions, and economic and health disparity. You see, long after your sentence is over and parole complete, system barriers continue, making it exponentially difficult to live well and achieve stability for your children and family. Nation Outside has coined this phenomenon the collective carceral impact, which represents an ecological approach to understanding the barriers we face post-incarceration. It is defined by the cumulative and chronic effects of system-level influencers that exacerbate poor health and wellness and increase our likelihood to return to jail and prison. First, you have public sanctions, those collateral consequences that are codified into our federal, state, and local statutes. These are largely employment and licensure related, but also include restrictions on housing, zoning, proprietorship, and transportation. The National Inventory of Collateral Consequences cites over 44,000 of these barriers nationwide, 837 of which are specific to Michigan. Private sector restrictions are also largely employment related, but could include things like the bank canceling your credit card or mortgage or blanket housing bans in the private sector. These restrictions usually come in the form of formal black and white administrative policies and are usually at the discretion of management. Well, 9 out of 10 employers and landlords screen applicants through the use of background checks. You have to have thick skin if you want to succeed post-incarceration. I was denied employment and housing more times than I can count. I had to move 9 times in 9 years relying on friends and family for housing, and I can assure you that even with the best of friends, they are not guaranteed to be there for you 100% of the time, especially not 5, 10, and 20 years down the line. Which leads us into our final type of CCI, the natural and personal consequences of incarceration. These consequences include how it feels facing your wife and children after being denied a job for the 8th time. The domestic abuse you and your children have to endure because you can't get approved for your own housing. Family disrepair from years of poor quality visitation and phone calls, the loss of parental rights and personal assets, putting up with racial discrimination and sexual harassment because you're just happy to finally have a job. Not knowing how to use a computer or turn on a gas stove, and being too embarrassed to even ask how. Suffering the health fallout of lacking access to fresh air, food, water, love, and quality routine medical care for years at a time. Disenfranchisement is also widely unaddressed and underreported. Studies show that a long-term jail stay for a misdemeanor offense is shown to cause significant voter disenfranchisement, which in turn causes lower rates of service utilization in our community. Now, when we begin to compare the causal drivers of incarceration with the collective carceral impact, we can begin to understand why it's such a vicious cycle. You see, for each causal factor on the left side, it can be traced back to a component of CCI on the right, and I won't go through them all, but just a few examples. Housing insecurity exacerbated by housing and zoning restrictions. Neighborhood disadvantage by employment restrictions and prison gerrymandering. Madam Vice Chairwoman, thank you so much for all you do. Poor health from disenfranchisement. I had a primary care physician my entire life until I was incarcerated, but when I got out, I didn't even know I was allowed to have health insurance. And my experience isn't uncommon. We've heard this from 58% of justice-involved beneficiaries who failed to seek medical treatment due to gaps in insurance coverage post-release, even at times in potentially fatal situations. Michigan Medicaid plans have also identified broad gaps in coverage for our population. I encourage you to see the full report in your folder. It is common knowledge that incarceration has far-reaching implications on individual, family, child, and community health. So much so that it is now considered by the Center for Disease and Control to be a social determinant of health. Social determinants of health are defined as non-medical factors that influence our health outcomes. And because the causal mechanisms of incarceration and recidivism are not linear, we cannot solve them with linear solutions. We need multifaceted, individually tailored approaches that address the full gamut of CCI, not solutions designed for other problems. Senator Outman, if you needed your car fixed, would you go to a plumber? Madam Chairwoman, if you needed your hair done, would you call Senator Irwin?
Well, that actually, he is known to cut his own hair, so that might not be leading to the conclusion you want. But no, so far I asked my husband.
Allow me then to introduce you to the usual providers of currently available reentry provision: corrections and law enforcement, clinical providers of mental health and addiction services, and faith-based organizations. In the first bucket, we have corrections, namely MDOC Offender Success, who differs greatly in their offerings across 10 regional sites. Now, in order to access these services, you must be referred by your parole agent, who acts as the gatekeeper. There are a few different problems with this model, but the primary being that formerly incarcerated people will often go homeless and hungry before disclosing to their parole officer that they've lost their job or housing. Both are considered violations of their parole. The punitive nature of parole is counter to the trauma-informed care required for effective reentry provision. I suppose an even bigger problem is that the large majority of released populations, about 80% of the state's returning population, and almost all people transitioning from jail and federal institutions receive no reentry or continuum of care at all. Second, you have the mental health sector. These professionals are absolutely and critically essential for everyone, but in order to help people, we have to get them in our door. And we cannot expect our population to make it inside for services when we have to play the Game of Thrones to get there. Not to mention, mental health is stigmatized in the Black, brown, and poor communities, the populations most affected by CCI. Therapists, often referred to by the courts and parole, are associated with authority and institution, often precluding trust and therapeutic rapport before it can even begin. Plus, we know reentry needs are much broader than what mental health alone can offer. Talk therapy and medications simply were not designed nor intended to be reentry solutions, and so retooling these interventions is kind of like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. It's just not enough to mitigate the full gamut of CCI. It's also important to note that Kubiak 2020 and MDOC's own revocation report cite less than 1/3 of incarcerated people met the DSM criteria for a severe mental health illness or substance use disorder. And so when we filter reentry through these services, we miss out on 60 to 70% of the returning population. The third primary provider of reentry services are led by faith-based organizations in the form of prison ministries. These services tend to be piecemeal, meaning they may have a food pantry, they may have a clothing closet, they may have a combo. But these programs lack an evidence base, standards of care, training associated with their practices, and services usually incorporate denominational prayer that can lack inclusivity and basic DEI practices. So we know there's a problem. We know solutions are limited. So why care? Well, in the most rigorous 9-year longitudinal study done of our time, the average national recidivism rate was cited to be at a jaw-dropping 83%. Recidivism in Michigan results in approximately 1/3 of new prison admissions and closer to 2/3 of the jail population. It's a revolving door. Recidivism aside, when you multiply collective carceral impact, not just by the 2 million bodies who have been physically through our system, but by their entire families, communities, and generations, and then you subtract all the social and economic vitality they would have otherwise brought into those families and communities during those years, and then you add the staff turnover, stress, and burden placed on our corrections, law enforcement, educators, therapists, hospitals, victims, DHHS workers, budgets. Well, we've easily wiped out at least how much of Michigan's generational health, wealth, and wellness is simply not sustainable. And that's why 2 years ago, Nation Outside set out to innovate a model that didn't just focus on keeping people at home in a single community, but one that was intent on true transformation. And after 18 months of honing our design and incorporating feedback from hundreds of stakeholders across the state, including impacted people and their families, MDOC and DHHS leadership, NHW, CMH, the recovery community, academia, service and resource providers, and benchmarking almost every peer reentry movement around the state and nation, we innovated a sustainable path for trauma-informed peer-led reentry training, workforce, and service delivery. Professional peer models are not a new concept. They are widely utilized across health and human service sectors of all kinds. Mental health utilizes certified peer support specialists, a role requiring lived experience with overcoming mental health challenges. The recovery community utilizes recovery coaches to assist peers through addiction challenges. The VA utilizes veteran peers. There are even housing peers in the homeless sector and elder care peers in the senior sector. While a subspecialty of reentry peers has not yet been formally established in the state of Michigan, which is what Nation Outside and our partners are seeking to do, the model has been proven effective in the reentry space in many other states. In your folder, you'll find a summary of peer models and their proven effectiveness. More than a dozen states, both red and blue alike, have recently launched or are currently innovating statewide peer-based reentry models. Now, in order to have a robust and effective peer workforce, you have to have professional competencies associated with training. Our peer-led reentry training is a 14-day evidence-informed professional practicum, and its curriculum is extensive, incorporating a wide range of modalities from didactic instruction to role play. Peer-led reentry navigators, selected through a competitive process, are trained in case management, group, and one-to-one mentoring activities to prepare them in assisting peer clients in reaching timed and measurable outcomes across 3 specific domains of life functioning. Service outcomes include vital doc, health insurance, and primary care attainment, permanent housing and employment retention, improved access to community resources, and strengthened healthcare service utilization rates, as well as increased community and civic participation. Long-term, we expect to see drastic improvements in self-efficacy and quality of life for participants pre to post-test, including reduced revocations and emergency room and crisis stabilization visits. We strongly feel that peer-led reentry training and certification should be standardized across the state because it would ensure a competent workforce and a comprehensive and inclusive client continuum of care. More than that, statewide training models are a critical requirement of peer workforce sustainability through Medicaid. In Michigan, traditional peer models have been funded through community mental health, but we know mental health, while playing a crucial part of reentry, is not mutually exclusive. Incarceration is a social determinant of health, and as such, reentry meets Medicaid's criteria for medical necessity. States are already beginning to take advantage. California's new 1115 waiver included Medicaid reimbursement for reentry, including peer services, and was federally approved just 2 weeks ago. States know reentry services eligible for Medicaid reimbursement allow a 3-to-1 federal match, essentially allowing these types of programs to pay for themselves. MDHHS offices of Medicaid and Policy and Planning have been exploring opportunities around peer-led reentry and Medicaid expansion with us for several months now. We are confident that this innovation is on the horizon. As we collaborate towards needed policy changes that would expand Medicaid coverage for PLR, we have been diligently working to organize providers across diverse community landscapes that would serve as ideal early adopters. Community Corrections of Oakland County in a Brighter Way, a reentry organization in Washtenaw County, answered the call and are in the process of launching their initial cohorts. In the coming 2 years, we are looking to extend our pilot long enough to both see Medicaid policy innovations through and test the model across 4 counties to provide an evidence-based proof of concept for statewide scale. Team Wellness in Wayne County and Peckham in Ingham County are committed to serving as pilot expansion sites in year 2. We have additional interest from counties all over the state, but this 2-year extension will serve 400 people in year 1 and 1,080 people in year 2, including about 1/3 of the women returning to southeastern Michigan from Huron Valley. This does not include returning citizens in the community who are years post-release who come to us in droves seeking resource connections. Reentry populations involve more than just those leaving MDOC. It includes pretrial, probation, jail, and federal populations. It includes people who have been out for years and don't qualify for clean slate. If I were to, God forbid, lose my job in housing, it would include me. As a doctoral candidate at a Tier 1 research university studying to solve these very issues discussed today, I understand the great importance of empirical rigor and methodical data collection. As you would have been able to see from the video, Dean Kubiak's team at Wayne State Center for Behavioral Health and Justice has agreed to be our independent evaluator. We are currently in the early stages of evaluation planning with their team, and they are reviewing our logic model and forming recommendations to assure we have the methods and tools in place for valid and reliable data collection. They will deliver 2 year-end evaluations detailing the effectiveness of our service and implementation outcomes. This project presents an exciting opportunity to understand both quantitative and qualitative aspects of what works for reentry. We're hoping to use our findings to develop a proof of concept that will evidence federal funding for a 5-year Medicaid demonstration project. Our site partners are dedicated to working with Nation Outside to improve reentry outcomes, and many of them are in the room today or have submitted letters of support, which you'll find again in your folder. This model is not competitive with providers. It's complementary. It fills the gaps. Over the next year, we'll be convening partner stakeholders across DHHS, DOC, insurance, and providers in mental health, education, workforce, housing, and faith communities to see how we can improve access to care, integrate efforts, and better assist clients in navigating the web of their available service specialties. In short, reentry looks like this right now, and with PLR, we want to make it look like that. We are here with a one-time ask of $5.9 million to support our pilot expansion and its evaluation through the end of year 2025. The state's $5 million investment would bring a conservative $23 million ROI over 2 years, not including prospective healthcare savings, which are also expected to be tremendous and something we will be studying in our evaluation. Your support would mean a new multifaceted approach to reentry, ameliorating the gaps identified in currently available services. Together, we can make Michigan a leader in reentry and set a precedent for the rest of the country. This model creates career pathways, reduces costs, promotes cross-sector collaboration, and most importantly, improves health and wellness outcomes for Michigan's justice-impacted families and communities. Thank you, and I will take your questions at this time.
Thank you very much for your very thorough presentation. I also want to shout out to Tony Gant and Adam Grant. I see you out there in the audience. Thank you for your work. Any questions? I think you've said everything. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
There's only 2 things that can happen once you go to prison. And that's, you're either going to die in prison or you're going to get out. There's nothing else that can happen. So if I'm going to get out, you want me to prosper and move forward, don't you?
What is the reentry program? You're incarcerated. You don't know what family members you can trust because wasn't none of them there for you when you was locked up. So why the hell do I want to go home and sleep next to a person that didn't even write me a letter? I didn't have nobody but me. So therefore I had to look out for me. Went and started staying with a few people. Slept on this person's couch for a couple of days till I figured it out. I'm making them think I'm okay, I'm stable, I got a home, I got a job, I'm doing good. I was fucked up.
Just knowing that your peer has went through something similar, it speaks volumes within themselves. Peer-led reentry programs is the catalyst of making sure individuals like myself become successful.